Hello and welcome back. Today we will be looking at specific countries within the realm of South Asia, looking at some of the individual regions that we have here. So let's go ahead and open up by looking at our realm as a whole. So we'll be looking at specific countries such as India, which does make up the majority of this realm. We have Pakistan in the west. Then we have Nepal and Bhutan in the northeast. We have Bangladesh. We also have two island nations of Sri Lanka and the Maldives here. We'll also talk about Kashmir, which is not necessarily its own individual country, but it is being controlled and contested by three different countries in this realm. Okay, so we left off talking about how we had a lot of other influences within this realm. For example, the the Mughal Empire that we ruled in through here. And we left off 1940s was Britain controlled the majority of this realm. So this red border here shows you the boundary of the British Empire as of the 1930s. However, following World War II, Britain couldn't really control its colonies anymore. They had a lot of repair to do back home, and so they left its colony in South Asia. The colony was then divided up into Muslim countries and Hindu countries. This is a great example of an imposed boundary in that the people of India and Pakistan didn't really have much of a say in this. It was very much forced upon them by the Britons, or the Brits, who saw the very different cultural and religious differences throughout this realm and wanted to prevent future wars by having separate areas for separate cultures. Okay, so we had India was going to be largely a Hindu country, and then we have West and East Pakistan, which were intended to be Muslim countries. Okay, so people who were living in the wrong area, so if you were, say, a Hindu living in West Pakistan or a Muslim living in India, there was a big scramble for people to move to the area that was more supportive of their religion. I do want to point out that Kashmir said, nah, we don't really want to be part of this. So Kashmir tried to stay out of this, as the same as Hyderabad or Hyderabad and Goa both said, no, we don't really want to be part of this. And then Ceylon was its own separate country, now called Sri Lanka. So there was a lot of conflicts with people frantically running, moving their families and their homes, as we had, two new countries being, birthed out of this movement here. So there were civil wars over here between India and West Pakistan, and then there were riots throughout. So you can see people moving in and out of areas, trying to find places that they thought were safer for them to be. And we estimate that more than 1 million people died in these ensuing civil wars and riots. So again, an example of an imposed boundary forced upon the realm by a foreign colonial power. An important character in all of this would be Mahatma Gandhi. So Mahatma Gandhi was born Mohandas Gandhi. Mahatma is actually a respect title. It's a title, an honorary title. So he was born in the 1860s and actually was trained as a lawyer in London. He spent much of his life living and working in South Africa. And he was opposed British rule and did a lot of work in trying to organize farmers and peasants, increase rights for farmers and peasants, really advocate for anti-colonialism and independence. And he was very notable for his nonviolent means of protest. So he did a lot of fasting through his work, but really emphasized the use of nonviolence. He also opposed the British partition, and he instead wanted there to be the entire region united, regardless of religion. And he was unfortunately assassinated by a Hindu nationalist in 1948. But his legacy we still see very much in civil rights workers throughout the world who look to him in his example of nonviolence and organizing the workers and lower class people to stand up against colonial powers. So if we look at India today, we still do see divisions based on culture and religion. It is a very large country, both in terms of land size and number of people. China and India are kind of always going back and forth as to who is the most populous country by number of people. But we can kind of see a difference in some of the language bases in this map here. So for example, in the north and in the east, we have a lot of Tibetan and Burman influence. Burma you may also refer to as Myanmar. We'll talk about that more in Southeast Asia. We do have the Indo-Aryan languages in the north. Remember, we talked about the Indus River Valley civilization, and following the fall of the Indus River Valley civilization, we did have Aryans coming from what is now Iran. And so Hindi, for example, is part of that Indo-Aryan family. In the south, however, we have the Dravidian people of Dravidian descent, and it's a Dravidian language family. So we do have a divide in between different ethnic groups between the north and the south. Okay, about 65% of the country is rural, and so that's going to be, again, a lot of farm work. We do see a sharp class divide between the wealthy and the poor. More people are moving to cities, but we do absolutely have an expanding middle class in India. And India is rapidly becoming a major world power, so much so that we call it one of the BRICS. So BRICS are going to be BRICS is referring to 5 countries that are emerging as world economic powers. So it's going to be Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This photo here, you can see the rulers of those 5 countries. So we have Xi from China, Putin from Russia, Bolsonaro from Brazil, Modi from India, and Ramaphosa from South Africa. Okay, so initially when we named this group the BRICS, it started out as just BRICS. South Africa was added later. There was a lot of anticipation of how much economic power these countries would have. And they really have done a lot of growing. So from 1990 to 2014, these countries' combined GDPs went from only 11% of the world to almost 30%. So that's a huge growth in those countries, okay? And if we look specifically at India, in 2016, 61% of India's gross domestic product was from the services sector, or what is known as the tertiary sector. Okay, remember, primary sector, like we see in much of Russia, is going to be extractive work. Secondary is going to be manufacturing. Tertiary is going to be services. Okay, this is $108 billion of services exported, and 3.7 million people employed, largely by the IT services. Okay, very much in the IT service industry. And so there is some concern that perhaps the BRICS have not had as much of an economic power as it was thought. They were indeed heavily impacted by the economic downturn of 2008, 2009. But they still are major world players, right? We see in Russia, we see in China, we see in India, absolutely the middle class is very much growing. In fact, if we go back and look at, whoops, spoilers. If we go back and look at India today, we have 43 cities in India that have more than 1 million people. That's just of 2010, okay? We've also been seeing a lot of name changes in India. Originally, a lot of it was once British colonizers left, there was the reclaiming of names to their original Hindu names. So, for example, you may have heard of the name Calcutta. It's actually now called Kolkata. For example, Bombay is now known as Mumbai. So, for example, here's Kolkata here in the east, Mumbai here in the west. So if you hear people talk about Bombay and Calcutta, those are British names that were used during the British colonization. And so toponymy is the study and the work of place names, of how do we name places. And we see this all over the world, that cities and streets and parks are renamed to honor someone or to remove someone who's controversial. And so this is happening a lot in India to erase the impact of British colonization. There is some concerns that more Muslim-sounding names are being erased. And so it's gotten a bit contentious. We still are seeing names change today throughout India. There's some concern that it might be erasing more of the Muslim population in favor of Hindu population. And even though most of India is Hindu, there is a very large Islamic population here as well. Okay, so there's our BRICS there. Let's go to Pakistan. So in the original 1947 partition, Pakistan and Bangladesh were one country. They were referred to as West Pakistan and East Pakistan. And the idea, again, this was an imposed boundary. This is created by the Brits. And it was like, oh, let's put all the Hindus over here and put all the Muslims over here. Okay? So you had two countries that weren't even touching, or I should say two regions that weren't even touching, that were being ruled as one country. Could be a bit problematic, right? So there was a civil war in the early 1970s, so 71, 72, and they were then divided into separate, distinct countries. So West Pakistan is now just called Pakistan, and East Pakistan is called Bangladesh. So they are now separate countries. They're both Muslim countries, but they are very different ethnic groups. Again, one of the big problems we see with imposed boundaries is we're lumping people together by assumptions and stereotypes and not actually asking their consent. So about 60% of Pakistan's population lives in the eastern province of Punjab, and about 64% of Pakistanis live in rural areas and again work in agriculture. This woman here is Benazir Bhutto. She was the first woman to be elected leader of a Muslim country in 1988. Her reign was not without controversy. She was removed from office under corruption charges and was eventually assassinated. But she does still remain the first female to be elected official leader of a Muslim country. She joins several other women in this realm. So South Asia has had a nice history of female leaders. So this is before Margaret Thatcher. This is before Angela Merkel. This is before Hillary Clinton. We had women in positions of powers in South Asia. So the first woman in the world to be elected as a country's leader was Sirimavo Bandaranaike, and she was the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, and she was elected in the early 1960s. And she served something like 40 years in office. And so she actually was there from the time when she first was Prime Minister. It was still referred to as Ceylon and was still part of Great Britain, and then she was there when they gained their independence and became Sri Lanka, and then the president became the official head of state, and she was the prime minister for all of that. We also have Indira Gandhi, pictured here with Richard Nixon in the 1970s, and she was the Prime Minister of India, and she had multiple terms. And as of 2019, she is the only woman to be the Prime Minister of India. And so I just wanted to highlight that this realm has an exceptional history of having female leaders among its ranks. So if we talk about Pakistan in the west, we now look at Bangladesh in the east. So it has a very low elevation, as we talked about in our previous lecture, and often flooded during seasonal monsoons. Overwhelmingly, you see most Bangladeshis live in rural areas, so it's more than 60%. Quite a few of them are very poor and work in agriculture. One of their major cities is going to be Dhaka. And so in 2017, the gross domestic product per capita, so this is the amount of money per year per person, was a little over $4,000, to give you an idea of the amount of poverty that we see in Bangladesh. It's also a very dense country. So it's one of the most densely populated countries in the world. We're looking at 1,225 people per square kilometer, and that's not looking at the physiologic density. That's just number of people divided by square kilometers. So it's even more dense in some places. I wanted to highlight our population pyramid here, showing that it is a rapidly growing country. We are in tropics here, so we have lots of rain, lots of sun. As you can see, this gentleman here working in the fields. This is how rice is grown. You can see him standing in water. So rice fields are flooded. That's one way that they are grown here. So we have a rapidly expanding population pyramid. This pyramid here from 2020 shows pretty even numbers of gender, or I should say biological sex, because in much of this realm, we see a preference for male babies. Many of this countries in this realm have very large families, but male babies are still preferred. India has the most severe discrepancy between males and females. And a lot of this is due to infanticide. So girl babies are killed upon birth or given up for adoption or abortions because of just a cultural societal preference for male babies. And so you do have a lot of men outnumbering women, which can become a problem with time for adults to then find mates. And so you have some Indian men who are looking to other parts of the world to find women to marry, or moving to other parts of the world. But that has become an issue, again, not just in India, in much of this realm of a preference for male babies, resulting in more deaths of female babies. So now we're moving to a new country, in the country of Sri Lanka. You may have heard the term Ceylon because we see it on like teas sometimes. This is referred to Ceylon prior to 1972 when it was still a British colony. And so, for example, Ceylon gained independence from Britain in the 1940s following the rest of the partition of this realm. However, they remained as a commonwealth, where you've talked about commonwealths in other parts of the world, so kind of a leftover remnant of colonialism and imperialism until the 1970s when they became fully independent as the Republic of Sri Lanka. While under control of Great Britain, and we still see some today, and largely a plantation income, so growing things. We are in the tropics, so we have lots of water and lots of sun. So tea, rubber, rice, cinnamon, coffee, coconuts, all of these plants require lots of heat and lots of water. An important aspect to this realm here is going to be Rama's Bridge. Okay, so Rama's Bridge is now underwater. You can't see it anymore, but this allowed humans to walk from India, so starting in India, and they walked into Sri Lanka. Okay, and so the Sinhalese living here in the southern portion of Sri Lanka are going to be considered native of Sri Lanka, and they're going to be an Indo-European language family and largely Buddhist, right? Again, walking across from India 2,500 years ago. Now, I should point out there's another group here in the north, and those are going to be the Tamil ethnic group. And so these people were brought to Sri Lanka by the British to use as labor in the 1800s. So they brought here against their will to work for the Brits. And they are more of the Dravidian language family. Okay, much of South India is also of that still Dravidian language family. And there's been a lot of tension between the Tamils in the north and then the Sinhalese in the south. So much so that there has been a call for a split into two separate countries. And there's a group called the Tamil Tigers, which is a guerrilla rebel group that is trying to create a new country called Elam in the northern portion of Sri Lanka. So I should point out that this portion here is what's being claimed by the Tamil Tigers, is where Elam would be. It is not recognized. It's, again, what is considered an insurgent state we've talked about before, which is a guerrilla movement with a state within a state. So it's not recognized as independent, but it is a guerrilla group trying to create a new country. All right. There's been a lot of concern that Tamils are being murdered by the Sri Lankan government. So there's a lot of contention both ways. The Sinhalese major government is not wanting to recognize Elam as separate, and the civil war actually ended in 2009. So there has been some more attention to this in the news as recently. In 2019, there was a suicide bombing that did kill some civilians. But as 2009 was the official end of the Civil War, but we were looking at, tens of thousands of people were killed, and many of them were civilians. Okay, so the Maldives is going to be our other island nation here, and Maldives actually is made up of lots of different islands. So we have 1,000 islands of low elevation. This has the lowest average elevation country in the world. The average elevation is something like 4 feet. 80% of the country is less than 3 feet above sea level. So that is an extremely high risk for sea level rise. They are a very small population, so within all of Asia, it's going to be the smallest land square mileage. Also the smallest population. You're looking at less than 500,000 people. It's very popular for tourism. It is an island country and it's in the tropics, so beautiful for people who want to get away and scuba dive and so on and so forth. So about a third of its income comes from tourism. It's a very large tourism budget, which is going to be beneficial, as we'll see in a bit. It has also been under a lot of different European colonizers, first the Portuguese, and the Dutch, and then Great Britain. And so they're more recently having gained their independence. Their former president, he's no longer the president, but their former president, Mohammed Nasheed, was so concerned about the issue of sea level rise and how it would impact his country, he actually held a cabinet meeting underwater, as this photo shows here. It was largely done as a publicity stunt. They did have some order of business, but they invited the media to come partake in it. And a lot of it was to show how sea level rise and climate change would impact his country. There are photos of the president sitting in a scuba gear with, the flag of the Maldives posted behind him underwater, right? And prior to this, President Nasheed had announced that he wanted to buy land. Again, I mentioned that they had a very large tourism income. They wanted to use this income to buy land. They mentioned Australia and other parts of the world to move his people once the Maldives become uninhabitable. And so Mohammed Nasheed had a lot of attention of, hey, my country's going to be the one that goes first. In fact, there was some joke he made during a press conference, and someone says, well, what happens if other countries don't change? And he says, well, we all die, right? He was ousted in 2012. He is currently living in exile. He went to England for some medical care and stayed there. He is trying to come back. So there is tension here between the former president and current president, and some tension between how the state is being run. But in terms of attention for climate change and attention for sea level rise, Maldives definitely is at some of the forefront to show that their entire country and way of life would be obliterated, because when 3/4 of your country is less than a meter above sea level, that's a pretty severe state of affairs to be in. Okay, so if we go now, so we're going to switch gears. We looked at our island countries. Now we're going to look at our landlocked countries. So we're going to go up to the north, and first we're going to go off to Nepal. So Nepal is going to be a landlocked country. They are not near the ocean. Nepal has two severe environmental problems: deforestation and erosion. And these both are very hand in hand. So again, being in the northern portion of this realm, we have, of course, the Himalayas. And so deforestation, as it sounds, is going to be the removal of forests. A couple of different problems this presents. Number one is forests help provide habitat for animals. They help provide oxygen, right? Plants provide oxygen. But a big thing that deforestation does is the roots of trees helps hold things in place, right? So when you have a mountainous country, gravity tends to take over and push soil downwards. Well, if you remove the trees, those tree roots help hold things in place. If you remove those trees, now there's nothing holding it in place. And when we get those monsoons coming in, remember, snow melt starts here in the Himalayas and then moves outward. Then we're going to have a lot of soil being washed away. Nepal is going to be the home of Mount Everest, which is a giant tourist attraction, which has actually become really problematic. And there's been lots of attention to how tourists are paying lots of money to go to Mount Everest, who are largely unprepared for climbing this very dangerous mountain, and leaving human waste, oxygen canisters, food wrappers, even human bodies. If you die in Mount Everest, you usually are just left there. It's too hazardous to evacuate you. And this is a big, it's a burden for Nepal to have people come in, destroy the environment, and then leave. And it's not like people are hanging out and shopping a whole bunch here in Nepal. It's predominantly a Hindu country. There is a large Buddhist presence. In fact, Prince Siddhartha, who originated the Buddhist religion, was born here in Nepal. Something interesting here. So Nepal was a monarchy up until the 1950s. And when that monarchy was overthrown, and that uprising served as a great warning for their neighboring country of Bhutan. So the cool thing about Bhutan is they don't measure their success in terms of money, right? Instead, they use the gross national happiness. And so this is measuring the quality of life and contentedness as an indicator of success and not trade or money. So this started in Bhutan. And since then, many other countries have started to adopt this. It is a very long survey type process. And in fact, I read somewhere that Bhutan is like the 97th happy out of 156 countries. I'm not sure how accurate those numbers are. This is from Tim Harford in Financial Times. But again, this idea of let's not measure our success in terms of money and more about, are we happy? Okay, so there has been more of a push in many countries to say, hey, are your citizens happy? And so Bhutan's royal family saw what happened in Nepal. Again, we had their entire monarchy overthrown. And so Bhutan's royal family voluntarily stepped down. They said, we would like to not have an uprising. We're going to go ahead and just step away instead. And so they voluntarily dissolved the monarchy. This is now a democracy. So it's pretty unique to have a royal family voluntarily give up their throne for the sake of peace and the people. Okay, so again, we have a beautiful, large natural environmental areas. Very much tourism is going to be an aspect here. However, in contrast to Nepal, there are very strict rules and fees for people who come to see these beautiful places. Your textbook has some gorgeous photos of some of the mountains in this country here. And a lot of that is to support the environment. Okay, because if we have people coming in and littering and tromping everywhere, then you no longer have your beautiful environment to, pay your bills. So, yeah, a much more of enforcement of making sure that their land is protected and supported. About 60% of the work here is, again, going to be in those primary economic sectors, farming and forestry. So largely what we have here is what's called subsistence agriculture. In fact, we see subsistence agriculture in much of this realm overall. And so there's what we see a lot of in the United States, where if you have a farm, you're not eating all that food. If I'm an almond orchard, I'm not going to eat all of those almonds, right? I'm going to sell it. I'm going to sell those almonds. I have a surplus of agriculture. I sell it, and I take that money to then buy other things. Much of the world, and especially much of South Asia, people who work in farming do what's called subsistence agriculture, where you only farm enough to sustain your own needs and your population. You're not selling this to make money. You might trade. So if I have a bunch of eggs and you have a bunch of beets, we'll trade, and we can all have a lovely egg beet salad. But you're not growing so much acreage and so much product that you're hoping to have a surplus to sell to make money. Okay, if you look at a lot of early civilizations, this was much of what was done. It's just you're just feeding yourself. And it was then when we had surpluses that we had cities start to build up, where you had people who didn't have to farm because they were able to live off of the excess surplus from agriculture. But Bhutan is going to be largely subsistence agriculture. Okay, so now we're going to look at a very contested territory, and that is Kashmir. So Kashmir was one of the areas during the partition in 1947 that said, you know what, we would like to not be involved in this. And so they were an independent monarchy. But then things got complicated. So as you can see here, Kashmir is this realm kind of at the cornerstone of Pakistan and India and China. And as a matter of fact, you have some areas controlled by Pakistan, some areas controlled by India, and some controlled by China. It's very quite controversial. In fact, this map is from 2002, so it's already all different, right? Okay. So they started to stay a separate state. It's largely Muslim, but the government is largely Hindu. And so what happened is the people who lived here, being Muslims, said, hey, we would like to become part of Pakistan, when they saw that Pakistan was an independent Muslim country. The leadership, however, being Hindu, said, actually, India, can you come help us out, because we'd rather not be part of Pakistan. And India was like, sure, I'd love to come help if I can have some of your territory. So right now there are 3 states fighting over Kashmir. We've got India, Pakistan, and China. We're kind of at an awkward standstill because all 3 of these countries have nuclear weapons. And so no one wants to poke too hard because then, we might start World War III. And so Kashmir has been a very sensitive area. because of that. It is also very important in that it controls rivers, right? The Indus River, which is a major water source for this realm, especially for Pakistan, has to go through Kashmir first, and that's going to be some concern. Is do we have control over our own water? Because if a different country other than Pakistan has control over the headwaters, it's possible they could dam it, they could pollute it, they could do any number of things that then prevents Pakistan from getting their much needed water. So that's very much a concern here. Again, it's still very tense. You can find photographs of Chinese and Indian soldiers just face to face, nose to nose, kind of just waiting the other one out, right? Still a very tense place, but no one wants to start the fighting because when nuclear weapons are on the line, it might be more than we're willing to pay. Okay, the last group I want to talk about are going to be the Punjabi people. So the Punjabi people, the Punjab is a region in Pakistan and India. I mentioned that 60% of Pakistan lives in the eastern portion, the Punjab region. So the Punjab actually spans over both Pakistan and India. Okay, so this region here is in two different countries. It is not its own country. Okay, very rich agriculture. People here are called Punjabi. Many of them are Sikh. There is a good amount that are also Christian and Muslim, but majority would be Sikh. There is currently no Sikh state. Okay, so a lot of folks would like there to be a Sikh state, would be called Khalistan. And so Khalistan is the proposed new country that would be located in this Punjab region, taking pieces from both India and Pakistan. India says absolutely no way. And there has been protests on this point. Again, this is a very great, fertile area for agriculture, but that is an ongoing debate. It's lost a lot of steam. It was much more popular in the 70s. No one really talks about Khalistan anymore, but that is still a struggle to have a Sikh state in the Punjab region. Okay, that is all I have for you. We've got a shorter lecture in comparison to the last one. Thank you so much and take care.